Welcome to Channel 8 News. Up next, cybersecurity issues.
Due to the increasing number of and intensity of attacks on U.S. government infrastructure, the Office of Management and Budget, located in Washington, D.C., launched a campaign to discover weakness in the agency response and prevention of cyber threats.
I guess that sets up the how, where, and why of the issue. But how has this changed over time? Were agencies always this inept?
The U.S. used to lead in innovation in these fields, such as the use and creation of ARPANET, the first network to implement TCP that makes up the foundation of the Internet today. Famous programs such as Tor or the Onion Router, which allows for extreme anonymity, was developed by the U.S. Navy. And these are just a few examples of how the U.S. led in the field at the time. However, more and more APTs, or advanced persistent threats, are evolving around the world, and the U.S. can no longer keep up. IT departments simply lack the funding, time, or experience necessary.
So, what has changed recently? Why is this even relevant in 2018?
Well, the NSA, DOH, and the OMB are all on the side for security improvements and hold the most weight. However, other agencies must resist these changes, and interagency conflict could arise.
Well, what are some measures the U.S. needs to take to fix these issues?
We'll get to that. But first, the Executive Order 13800, Risk Determination and Action Plan, sent to the President, has identified that 74% of the agencies investigated have numerous security risks, and these agencies fall into the risk or high risk section. So that roughly translates to about 71 agencies out of 96 failing basic requirements for cybersecurity. Moreover, these risk groups are separated into three categories: high risk, fundamental issues, at risk, some measures taken but large gaps exist, and managing risk, either meets or exceeds the requirements.
So what's the big deal? How does that affect me, or even you?
Some potential impacts for these intrusions include the compromise of critical government data that allows smooth day-to-day functioning and basic governmental utilities. As of now, the OMB has identified 4 critical actions to address these problems. First, agencies need to increase their security risk awareness inside these governmental facilities. They should attempt to standardize IT and cybersecurity capability for a faster response in case of a compromise. They must consolidate agencies' SOCs. They should drive accountability and leadership for the agency through the use of certain incentives.
So from what I understand, they've identified 4 major problem areas. What are some ways that they're going to cover these issues?
That is absolutely correct. First, they will address the limited situational awareness issues, such as agencies not being able to understand or combat current risks that hinder smooth operation. And the OMB, in conjunction with NSA and DHS, will implement the cyber threat framework by the fiscal year 2019. Second, lack of standardization across the board has made it hard for agencies to gain awareness and combat these evolving threats. So the agencies will continue to standardize up to FY 2019 as planned. Third, limited network visibility has often led to data exfiltration and network compromise. So these agencies will continue to consolidate the security operations centers until fiscal year 2019 to address these issues. Finally, fourth, lack of accountability has led to a lack of management for security risks, so agencies will become responsible and will hold quarterly assessments for cybersecurity risks.
Now, a short break for our sponsor. Up next, how, why, and where did these recent hospital hacks occur? Next on Channel 8.
We're back after the break, and to answer your question, it all leads back to the 1990s when hospitals made the decision to switch to electronic databases. Since then, malicious hackers have realized the treasure trove of personal data offered by hospitals and have worked hard to steal and sell this data to third parties.
That was then, and this is now. How has things changed over these following decades?
Early in the 2000s, small groups like students would occasionally steal private data. However, due to the increased demand from third parties, now more than ever, hacktivists, cyber terrorists, and organized crime have begun targeting the health sector.
So that covers the earlier history for hospital compromise. But what are some more recent developments in this field?
Well, in the May of this year, hospitals were held hostage with ransomware and paid over $300 million to restore data and functions. These days, it is impossible for a modern hospital to run without electronic aid and data.
What's the opinion from the hospital IT or just the cybersecurity specialists in general?
Although IT and hospitals try to increase security, but hospital boards, which have the final say, often don't prioritize cybersecurity, and this is a major mistake because they're leaving their hospitals wide open to attack. Not only that, but cybersecurity experts are often just used as IT and are unable to do their job.
So the situation sounds unacceptable, especially to patients who want to keep their personal data safe. So what are some solutions that have been proposed to fight these problems?
With a heavy increase in funding, better encryption to protect against theft and sale of data, and better policies of backing up data, I'm willing to believe that these attacks will decrease in severity and scope.
Wouldn't it be likely for school districts using computing systems to also be threatened by the same attacks?
Yes, and with recent shifting thousands of districts to computing systems to run the day-to-day operations, this is more prevalent than ever. With the introduction of one-to-one computing policies in the U.S., school districts computing in the classroom has become one of the biggest additions to modern classrooms in decades.
While this seems to be a good idea on paper, proper cybersecurity would be a real concern, wouldn't it?
Correct again. Cybersecurity experts really see this as a huge problem, and this isn't just hypothetical. There have been multiple attacks on schools all around the world using computers in day-to-day. Some even as recent as February. For example, in Iowa, the Johnson Community School District was compromised by the Dark Overlord hacking group, exposing hundreds of students' personal information, and even resulted in parents of the students in the district being sent child-specific death threats and school voicemails being dumped online, allowing anyone to listen to them.
Wow. Do you know if some government funding is being dished out towards preventing cyber attacks?
To be honest, not really. Some schools using computers for critical operations have been lobbying for increased funds to deal with these threats, but not much increase in funding specifically to combat cyber attacks is really happening. It's a bubble that's waiting to be burst, and if we don't put in the proper funding and education to teachers and students how to be aware of phishing scams and safe websites, this bubble will pop, and the consequences will affect much more than the community in Iowa. There will be worldwide consequences, and we need to act now.
Wow, I had no idea. Do you have any specifics on how you would suggest the problem to be solved?
Well, just like any other issue, people have to take a real stance for a change to happen. Cybersecurity threats in school aren't really seen as a problem in many people's eyes, simply because they've never experienced or even heard of anything like these attacks before. We as a race need to focus on education of the threats and how to keep yourself safe, and need to remember cybersecurity threats as a real issue anywhere computing devices are used. If we can apply proper security to any computing systems of government facilities, to hospitals, to even schools, we can effectively solve the problem before it spreads, and can use the benefits of computers in our everyday life without any worry about cybersecurity threats.
Wow, it seems you're really passionate about this topic. That's all the time we have today, folks. See you next time. This is Channel 8 News.